Today's daf is daf Mem Zayin, and we start on the second line from the top. The Mishnah says that there's a principle called Shekinegdo Nishba V'Notel. That means if the defendant has to take a shvua, but he cannot take the shvua, he's been disqualified to take the shvua, then the Tovea will take the shvua in his place, and he will collect the funds. And one of the cases that the Mishnah mentions is that the nitba, the defendant, is a Masechet Bekubi, he's a professional gambler. So the Gemara asks, Haya echad mehem Masechet Bekubi hasu lamali. The Mishnah tells me that if he's choshed al shvua, meaning he's not capable legally, he's been disqualified for the shvua, then we transfer the shvua over to the plaintiff. If that be the case, the Mishnah didn't have to mention Masechet Bekubia. And the Gemara answers, Tana psula d'oraisa, Tani psula d'rabbanan. The Mishnah wanted to mention not only a case of somebody who's posel midoraisa, he's an outright gazlan, and witnesses have testified to that effect, but even in a case of a gazlan d'rabbanan, Rashi quotes the halacha asmachta lo kanya to explain why he's a gazlan d'rabbanan if he's a professional gambler. But even so, the Rabbanon, by passing this Masechet Bekubia, will now set up a situation in which the Shvua is transferred over to the Tovea, who will take the Shvua in order to collect as his claim. Hayu Shneim Chashudim. Now we have a machlokas that is recorded in the Mishnah between two Tanoim, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Meir. What happens when you want to transfer the Shvua from the Nitba, who's a Choshed al Shvua, over to the Tovea, but he also likewise is Pasal Shvua, he's Choshed al Shvua. What do you do in that case? So Rabbi Yossi says, Chazra Shvua l'Sinai. We'll see what those words mean, but literally the oath goes back to Shamayim. And Rabbi Meir disagrees, and he says, Yachloku, we split the money in half. Now it seems that there were two different traditions as far as who held what. So the Gemara says, Amalei Rav Rav Nachman, Heichitnan. Did you have Rabbi Meir say Yachloku? And Rabbi Yossi says Chazru Shvua l'Sinai, or the other way around. And it's actually Rabbi Meir who holds Chazru Shvua l'Sinai, and Rabbi Yossi's the one who said Yachloku. Amalei Lo Yadana. Apparently Rav Nachman forgot. Hilchas Amai. Now, why does the Gemara ask Hilchas Amai if Rav Nachman doesn't remember who holds what? And the answer is that we have a principle that in a machlokas between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi, we always paskin like Rabbi Yossi. So what Rava was asking Rav Nachman is maybe, even though you don't remember who holds what, but you might remember how we paskin. And if you remember the final halacha, maybe you had cases in which you presided as the judge and you implemented the halacha this way or that way, we'll understand that whichever way you implemented the halacha, that is in fact the shita Rabbi Yossi, because we always paskin like Rabbi Yossi against Rabbi Meir. Amalei lo yadana. I don't even know halacha l'maisa how we implement the halacha. However, the Gemara now quotes a tradition in which Rav Nachman had a case, and he actually paskined the halacha. Itmar, Omer Rav Yosef bar min Yomi, Omer Rav Nachman. Again, this is all the name of Rav Nachman. Rav Yossi Omer Yachloku. Notice how he switches it around. And according to this transmission, Dafka, Rav Yossi is the one who says Yachloku, not Rabbi Meir. And Rabbi Meir is the one who says Chazra Shvua l'Sinai. And that's going to give us a clue that the halacha is going to be Yachloku, because we always pass like Rabbi Yossi against Rabbi Meir. V'chein Toni Rav Zvid bar Oshaya, Rabbi Yossi Omer Yachloku. So now we have a tradition of Rav Yosef in the name of Rav Nachman, and a likewise tradition of Rav Zvid. Both traditions have it that Rav Yossi is the one who says Yachloku, not the way we have it in our text of our Mishnah. Rabbi Meir holds Yachloku. Ika Diamri, we have a different version. Di Amri Tani Rav Zvid, Rav Oshaya, Rav Yossi, Omer Yachloku. Fine. So we have now ample support to switch around the names, the Shitos in our Mishnah, and it's Rabbi Yossi who holds Yachloku. Rav Yosef Bar Yomi Avad Rav Nachman Uvda Yachloku. There was actually a case that came up in the courtroom of Rav Nachman about two people, two litigants, a defendant and a plaintiff, both of whom were disqualified for the Shavuos, and Rav Nachman Paskin Yachloku. So it seems that the correct text in our Mishnah would have it the reverse, and it's Dafka Rabbi Yossi who holds Yachloku. Chazra Shvuah L'Mekoma. This is the Shita Rabbi Yossi. Lehechan Chazra. What does this mean? The Shvuah went back to its original place, meaning back to Sinai. And on this issue, we have a fundamental controversy, a debate between the Chachmei Bavel and the Chachmei Eretz Yisrael. Omer Ravi Ami. A very interesting, make note of the name Rabbi Ami here, because his name is going to come up again. Rabosenu Shebe Bavel, according to the tradition in Bavel, and we'll have to see who that is, the Gemara is going to figure that out. Amru, they told us, Chazra Shvuah L'Sinai. Now, what does Sinai mean here in this context? The Rishonim say that the word Sinai here refers to Lo Sigzol, which means that we cannot implement a Shvuah, neither impose it on the defendant, nor on the plaintiff, because both are excluded. So we go back to the original halacha. What would have been the halacha had it been on a doraisa level without shekenegdo? And therefore, the two litigants are bound by the shvuah of Har Sinai, Mushba Miyomin Har Sinai. We all took that shvuah that said Lo Sigzol. And therefore, the halacha is going to be here in this case that since the nitba, who's chayv in a shvuah doraisa, cannot take that shvuah, then you can't force him to pay. The Torah forced him to take a shvuah, but in this case, he can't take the shvuah. He's disqualified. So the plaintiff is going to lose his money simply because hamotzi mechavel of araya. And although the defendant, under normal circumstances, if he had not been possible, would have to take a shvuah, and he cannot take the shvuah, and therefore, in such a case, the only thing we could say is he's not going to pay. The nitba is not going to be liable to pay, and he's liable to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to this shvuah of Lo Sigzal that he took at Har Sinai. However, Rabosenu Eretz Yisrael Amru, they had a different understanding. Chazra shvuah l'mechuyev lo. We go back to the original shvuah that was imposed by the Torah on the defendant, and he himself is disqualified from taking the shvuah. And what the Torah meant to say by imposing a shvuah on the defendant, according to the Chachmei Eretz Yisrael, is that, buddy, you have two choices: either you pay or you take a shvuah. If you can't take the shvuah, then we apply the principle you have to pay. So just to summarize, again, according to Chachmei Bavel, we'll see in a minute who that is. That's going to be Rav and Shmuel. They would hold that the nitba is potur, because the Torah is not saying, well, buddy, you have to take the shvuah. And at the same time, we're saying, but you cannot take the shvuah. And therefore, we go back to square one, and the defendant doesn't have to pay. He's not liable to pay. But the Chachmei Eretz Yisrael, and we'll soon see that that's Rabbi Abba, they're of the opinion that no, mitoch sheni yochel yishav mishalim. The Torah says that you can only free yourself of any liability if and when you take the shvuah. If you can't take the shvuah, tough luck. You got to pay up. And basically, the way I see it, and I hope I'm not misleading you, is the following: that there's a fundamental controversy of how to understand when the Torah imposes a shvuah on a defendant. Is the Torah saying, well, really, you should have to pay, but if you take the shvuah, we'll let you off the hook? Or no, the Torah is saying, really, you don't have to pay, but we're going to impose a shvuah on you. Omer Rav Papa, Rabbi Sein Shebavel, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Sein Sheberetz Yisrael, Rabbi Abba. Okay. How do we know that Rabbi Sein Shebavel is Rav and Shmuel? How did Rav Papa know such a thing? So Gemara says this nan, we know it from a Mishnah earlier in this Masechet on Memhei. V'chein hayisomim lo yiparu ela b'shvuah. Somebody owed a debt to Ruvain. Ruvain died, and now Chanoch, the son of Ruvain, comes to claim from the Love payment on behalf of his father. And the Mishnah establishes that Chanoch, the son of Ruvain, will have to take a shvuah that my father, before he died, Ruvain, before he died, did not tell me that this shtar is parua. It was paid up. Nor did I find anything amongst his documents that would indicate that he was paid up. And therefore the document stands on its own, but only if the Yisomim take that shvuah. Vavinimba, we raise the following objection: Miman. From whom do the Yisomim take an oath? If, in order to collect the chov of the lova that was owed to their father, and there's a shtar to testify to that effect, the Yisomim are not believed unless they take the shvuah, then I don't understand, says the Gemara. It's not logical. Avu and shakiv lo shvuah ve'inu v'shvuah. Had the father himself been alive, he has a shtar, a valid shtar. We have no reason to suspect the shtar is invalid or it was paid up. And he would collect without taking a shvuah. The lov would have to cough up the money. So why do the Yisomim, who are really basically projecting and representing their father's claim, why should they have to take a shvuah? Elahachi kamar. And therefore we have to reinterpret the Mishnah. V'chein hayisomim min hayisom lo yiparel shvuah. The case is the following. Shimon borrowed money from Ruvain. Both Ruvain, the Malva, and Shimon the Lova died. Ruvain has a son named Chanoch. Shimon has a son named, we'll call him Yankel. And now the son of Ruvain, who is the Malva, we called him Chanoch, he wants to claim payment from the son of Shimon, the Lovan. And under these circumstances, lo yiparu ela b'shvuah. We'll see what that means, but literally, before we see Rav and Shmuel, what it means is that Chanoch, the son of Reuven, cannot collect from the children the Yisomim of Shimon the Lover without taking a shvuah. Again, keep in mind, the shvuah is that we didn't hear from our father that this loan was repaid. So what does it mean? V'chein Yisomim Yisom lo yiparu el b'shvuah. Rav u'Shmuel, the Amri Travayu, both according to Rav and Shmuel, what is the scenario in which the case that Hanoch, according to this ruling, can only collect from Yankel, the Yisomim of the Lova, only if they take the Shvuah? Is Lo Shanu Ela Shemes Malva B'chaye Lova. The Malva died first. The Lova is still alive. And at that point, since the Lova died later, therefore, had, just 1 second, therefore the Malva, since he had a star, was never chayav a shvua. So again, since the Malva has a star against the Lova, and now it's against the Yisomim of the Lova, is therefore, what would have to be now is that the Yisomim of the Malva could only collect from the Yisomim of the Lova with his Shvuah. It'll become a little bit clearer as we go a little bit further. Aval meis Lova b'chai Malva. Let's say the Lova died first, and that would mean that the only way the Malva, we call them Ruvain, could collect from the Yisomim of Shimon is only if they take a Shvuah, because he could never collect from Yisomim without a Shvuah. That was the Takonis Chazal. Is therefore Kvar Nischayev Malva lebnei Lova Shvuah, v'eino de Morish Shvuah lebanav. So the Malva himself would have no recourse to collect the loan from the Yisomim of the Lova without a Shvuah. And that is because the Lova died first. And the only claim that the Malva has is to the Yisomim of the Lova, and Yisomim ela b'Shvuah. So since the Malva could only collect with the Shvuah, therefore the son of the Malva, when the Malva dies subsequent to the death of the Lova, could only claim from the Yisomim of the Lova with a Shvuah. But ein adam morish Shvuah lebanav, meaning that the children cannot take the Shvuah. We don't expect them to know for sure, with all definite certainty, that the loan was never repaid. I mean, they can only say, well, we found the shtar and we never heard otherwise, but they don't know for sure that the loan was repaid. And therefore, this shvuah is meaningless, because a shvuah has to be on a tainis bari, on a definite claim, and they don't have a definite claim because they don't know what happened to their father. That's called ein adam morish shvuah lebana. So now, based on this statement and ruling of Rav and Shmuel, we're going to be able, Rav Papa is going to be able to conclude that when we said that Rav Hosseinu Shebebavel are of the opinion that Chazra Shvuah L'Sinai, and that means that the defendant is not liable to pay, and he'll have to deal with the Shvuah of Har Sinai of Lo Tigzol. So that must be Rav and Shmuel, because the logic of Rav and Shmuel is that if the Malva himself during his lifetime, because he survived beyond the Lova, would have to take a Shvuah from the Yisomim of the Lova, then the Malva is not Morish a Shvuah L'Banav, and therefore the Yisomim of the Malva cannot take the Shvuah, and therefore they can't collect the Chol. And that's called, says Rav Papa, Chazra Shvuah L'Sinai. Rabbi Hosseinu Shebebavel, Shebe'etzol Rabbi Abba. How do we know that? Oh, so now we get to the famous sugya of Naska de Rabbi Abba, which I think we learned in the past in Masechet Sanhedrin. Okay, so let's just what we call Isavenik, outside. What's the case of Naska de Rabbi Abba? We know for sure with Adam and so forth that Ruvain is in possession of something called a naska. I think we tried to call it a bullion, some sort of a solid piece of metal. And now Shimon has this naska in his possession, and an aid, one witness testifies that Shimon went into the property of Reuven and literally stole the naska. Now Reuven is suing Shimon for theft, for stealing the naska, but Reuven doesn't have any personal knowledge of the fact that Shimon stole the naska. All we have is the testimony of one witness. So Rabbi Abba says that one witness is Machayev Shvua, and therefore Shimon has to take a Shvua to contradict the aid and claim under oath that he never stole the Naska. And Shimon can't take that Shvua. We'll see why. Ahu Gabra the Chotev Naska Michavre. So he said that Shimon stole a Naska from Ruvain, also coming to Rabbi Ami. The case came from Rabbi Ami. Again, keep in mind Rabbi Ami. Yosef, Rabbi Abba, Kamei, and Rabbi Abba was sitting in front of Rabbi Ami. I see Chadsada, Ruvain the Tovea, who claims to be the victim of theft, brings in one witness to testify, the Michtav Chatfa Minei, that Shimon stole the Naska. Amalei, Shimon says, in Chatfi, Vididi Chatfi. It's true that I grabbed the Naska from Ruvain, but it was mine. Now, when Shimon claims I grabbed it and it was mine, he's not really believed. Amar Rabbi Ami, how should we judge this case? Namely, Zil Shleim. If we're going to force Shimon to return the Naska, based on the testimony of one witness, when Shimon claims it's his Naska, is like a Trei Sadi. The Torah says that we don't rely on the testimony of one aid, and Al Pishnayim Eidim Yokum Tov, there's only one aid. Niftere. On the other hand, if we're going to say that Shimon gets off scot-free and he's allowed to maintain his possession over the Naska, Ika Chadsada, and Nema Lezil Ishtaba. What we need from Shimon is an oath, a shvua, to be makrish, to contradict the testimony of that one aid. Because that's the halach. The Torah says that Erechus Mechayiv Shvua, it means you have to contradict the aid and take a shvua. But Kevin the Omer Michtav Chatvi, at the very moment that he, Shimon, confesses that he grabbed this Naska from Ruvain, then Havile Kigazlan. He's already like a Gazlan. He claims that it was his. Go prove that claim. Amalei Rabbi Abba. Rabbi Abba was sitting there in the courtroom, and he says, "Havi mechuyev shvuah v'eni yachli shava." Shimon can't take a shvuah. Why? Because Shimon, by his own admission, concurs with the testimony of the one aid. What did the aid say? That he grabbed it, stole it. Shimon agrees. He confesses that he took it. And halacha of shvuah seid echad, it means you need a shvuah to contradict the aid. Therefore, says Rabbi Abba, kol hamechuyev shvuah v'eni yachli shava mishalim. Since Shimon grabbed this naska, he cannot take a shvuah against the aid. So the aidus of the aid now stands eisen, strong. So we have testimony that Shimon grabbed the naska from Ruvain, and that makes him into a gazlan. Shimon says he took it because it's his. We're not going to believe him. He can't take the shvuah. And if he doesn't take the shvuah, he's got to pay it. Now, this ruling of Rabbi Abba supports the shita of the Rabboseinu shebe'eretz Yisrael. And that's how we know, and Rav Papa knew, that Rabboseinu shebe'eretz Yisrael is indeed Rabbi Abba. And it means that a nitba is liable to pay if he's chayav a shvu and he can't take the shvu. Right. So let's go over this one more time. The psak of the Rabbi Hussein Shevet Yisrael was that if the defendant was chayav a shvua, he can't take the shvua, and we want to transfer the shvua over to the plaintiff, and he can't take the shvua, then the defendant is liable and he has to pay, and that's reflected here in the sugi of Naska de Rabbi Ab. Omar Rava Kavasi de Rabbi Ab Mistabra. I'm going to quote a brisa that would support Rabbi Abba. Ditani Rabbi Ami Shvuas Hashem Tia Ben Shnei V'lo Ben Ayorshim. So what is the case of Shvuas Hashem Tia Ben Shneihem? Hechi Dami. In Lema Di Amar Le Monali Abba Biyada Vicha. My father had a mana in the hands of your father. Right, this is going to be Lo Ben Ayorshim. The Amalei. So the Nitba says, Chamshin Islay Chamshin Leslay. I admit that my father owed your father 50, but I deny the other 50 that you claim that my father owed your father. And on this, we're going to have a mute of Lo Ben Ayorshim. So Rava says, Mali hu umali avur. What are you going to tell me? V'lo ben ayarshim, and therefore the toveh doesn't have to take a shvua. Well, wait a second. The toveh admits to 50. In other words, he denies the claim of 100, but he admits that he owes 50. So that's called modu v'mixas atayna yishava. Elolav, therefore, ti omar le monoli abba biyada vicha. So the Toveh says that your father had a money that belonged to my father. Amalei, chamshin yadana v'chamshin lo yadana. I know that your father lent 50 to my father, but I don't know that he lent him 100.